Hi, Alyssa here, the Education Coordinator for the Upper Deschutes Watershed Council. Today we are here on Waichus Creek near Alder Springs, and we are going to use this beautiful spot as our inspiration to create a work of art called a batik. What things do you notice in this landscape? What are you drawn to? Maybe the colors in the rocks, the trees sticking out of the ledge. Maybe it's the sound of the water or the birds chirping. Whatever you're drawn to, use that as your inspiration and focus on that for the next step. Once you have some inspiration, find a scrap piece of paper that's about the same size as your piece of fabric or design area. Then sketch with a pencil your design, thinking about how detailed you want to make it. The more detailed lines you add, the more white space and intricate design will be left on your fabric. But be careful not to make lines too close together, because then they can run together and become kind of muddled. Once you have your drawing just how you like it, you will then go in with a Sharpie to really darken and kind of widen some of those lines. You'll go through all the lines like I've done here on this fish drawing, making sure they're all nice and dark and clear. And then you can take your drawing and put your fabric on top. You want to line it up as best as you can. Once you have your fabric secured and even on your design, you can start by going through with either the blue glue, using the squirt bottle as kind of a pen or a paintbrush to trace over those lines. You don't want to make it too thick and globular, but you also don't want to do too thin, because then it won't really show up. So you can use the blue glue, or if you don't have that and you're using the flour and water mixture, I've just mixed it in a bag here and then cut off kind of the tip of the bag. You can use that as a squirt bottle. Now this won't be quite as fine, but can still have a really cool effect. Okay, so now I've covered all of my lines with blue glue or some of the flour mixture. I'm going to want to remove it from the piece of paper and the board and let it air dry overnight someplace where there's no wind. And then once it's fully dry overnight, I can start the dyeing process. So now I've given my fabric overnight to dry. The glue or the flour is totally hardened on there. You can kind of see a faint outline where the glue or flour is. And now it's time to paint or dye. I've set up 3 different dyeing or painting techniques to give you options to do at home. One is with acrylic paints, which can be more challenging, but also can give you a lot more opportunities for painting and more intricate designs. For this, I just mix about 1 part paint to 2 parts water, mix it up so it's kind of nice and thin, and then you can actually use paint brushes to paint onto your design. And you can paint all over it, and actually the more color you put on, the better. The glue will resist the paint and help to create those really cool pattern lines. The next way to dye your batik is with fabric dye. For the fabric dye, I've just mixed about a half teaspoon to a half cup of warm water and mixed it in there. And then I've used some of my tie-dye techniques to gather my batik in a couple spots with rubber bands. And for this, I'm just going to dip dye. So I'll start with just 1 color, and this usually just works best with maybe 2 to 3 colors max. You'll want to let it set for a few minutes and then dip it into your next color. for a few minutes. Then you'll want to let it stay with the rubber bands on overnight to dry. The last option you can do is to use food coloring. You can experiment with your food coloring to make stronger dyes, but for this I used 5 drops of food coloring to about a cup of warm water. Once again, for this, dip dyeing works best. So I've gathered my original sun flag into a few different rubber bands to create a cool pattern. I'll go ahead and, just like with the fabric dye, leave it in my first color for a few minutes, and then I'll dip it into my second color for a few minutes. Now that all of my flags are either dip dyed or paint dyed, I will let them sit just like this overnight or until they are fully dried. Next, you will want to pull off the rubber bands and rinse them in warm water. Sometimes it can be helpful to use a scrub brush to really scrub out the glue. You'll know that the glue is all out when it feels smooth and there's white lines left where the glue once was. Hang your work of art up to dry and enjoy this nature-inspired piece you have created. Thank you for joining us today. This video was brought to you by the Upper Deschutes Watershed Council.